This is the Non-Tech Podcast, conversations about education, technology, and culture, with Dr. Doug Reed and Dr. Matt Stranick. Thank you for joining us.
My name is Dr. Doug Reed, and I am located on Abagway, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people.
My name is Dr. Matthew Stranick, and I am located in Menakwisk in St. John, New Brunswick, which is situated on the traditional and unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik Maliseet people.
Hey everybody, welcome to the latest installment of the Non-Tech Podcast, episode, I think this actually is episode 40 that's going up here, Doug.
I'll take your word for it.
The big 40, serious stuff. We're going with we're keeping with the seasonal theme, seasonal-ish, for those who are playing along at home. The last episode, rather an ingenious addition by Aaron, Dr. Doug's fellow educator partner, right? She sort of threw us that one about the ghosts of the past, present, and future. So we are landing, I believe, if I'm looking off the right set of notes, we're looking at the ghost of EdTech present here, aren't we, Doug?
Yeah, that's the plan. And spoiler alert, the next one might be Ghosts of EdTech Future, or Ghosts of EdTech Yet to Be.
And then we have and then further to that, there's the plan for the mystery episode for the very end of the year. I think we're gonna get that one out, and then we're gonna make it easy on ourselves by defaulting back to the episode that we were meant to do last episode instead of the episode that we did. So you can imagine all the goings on behind the scenes for this. So well done, Doug, for putting those notes together, as always. Looking forward to diving in. Anything else you want to add before we get started here proper, bud?
When we finish, I want to go back and count the number of times you said episode in that last sentence.
Oh, really?
Because I think you said it about 5 times, and they all made sense. But it was just funny to me. I'm just.
Oh, really? Today, so. Should I be? Should we be looking to chop that for quality assurance purposes? Should I flag that in Camtasia?
No, don't worry about it.
Okay, man. All right.
Right, there is stuff that we chop, but not that. That's cool.
I've been known to remove the occasional verbal tick from a conversation using Camtasia. So I will review the transcript, as it were, and cut or not accordingly, Doug.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, just before we get started, I was kicking myself this morning because last episode was like Ghosts of EdTech Past, and I found this shirt. And I wore this shirt, this ECU, my alma mater shirt, on like our very first episode. And I realized that would be EdTech Past. So I should have wore the shirt last episode for the people that are watching on video. For the people listening, yeah, you don't care what I'm wearing. That's fine. But it was just, oh yeah, I got this shirt, and this will be like the 5th time I've worn it in 20 some years. But one of those things. I'm a pack rat.
Mm-hmm. It adds a certain je ne sais quoi to the thing, if I can say.
Absolutely. Now, I can't spell je ne sais quoi, but I understand the concept completely.
It's not that you je ne sais pas. It's that anyway. Boy, oh boy, I'm not even gonna start. I will tell you that my kids are getting bilingual-ish at this point in their lives. It's pretty cool to see. It's cool to see your kids having like objectively more success in certain key areas than what you may have done, at that same kind of age bracket. So well done, boys. If you're watching this, which I'm sure you're not, but if you are somehow, even in the future. Anywho, speaking of the present, before we veer too off into the future or into the past, why don't you cue up the first resource here for us, bud?
Sure. So what I've done is last time I went into the past, like I found stuff from the 1860s all the way up to the 1900s and into that. And now we're hovering around. My oldest article is from 2020, which is this Weller article, 25 years of EdTech. And I referred to this a little bit in the previous episode where the tech part of EdTech stands taller or walks taller than the ed part. And it's time for that to change. It's like the technology is not whiz-bangy anymore. The technology has been the dominant force, but that has to change. It has to become the education part because we're educators before we're technologists. And I'm preaching to the converted, obviously. So I really liked finding that. And that is something that's the change that's where we're at right now, because everything is like where we're at right now and what's going on. And it just bugs me that it's like, oh, you're the computer guy. And it's like, no, I'm the educator who knows about technology. There's a difference. You must have the same kind of Sorry, go ahead.
Please, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you if you've got similar experiences with in your life.
Okay, well, I guess my thing always kind of comes back lately to the fact that I'm kind of it's kind of refreshing at this point, in as much as I'm on month 5 of being not just employed again, which is cool, but working in a pretty different spot than what I would have envisioned earlier in my career where I would be now. So I don't know. It's just everything is kind of new in terms of what I'm approaching. And I've been given really wide latitude to design, I think. I don't believe I'm misquoting my organization here by saying I'm given pretty wide latitude to design a pretty comprehensive suite of training resources, multimodal programming, and a lot of interesting areas. So I'm not really answering your question here, Bud, but I guess I would just say that when it comes to anything to do with my perspective on education from wherein my context presently is, so kind of relevant, the present for me is something not that I've relied on in terms of subject matter, in terms of format. It's not something I'm really, had too much past experience with, as it were. Although there are some technical skills and technical literacies that are coming in from previous experiences that are definitely proving advantageous here. And hopefully that's not too ambiguous sounding. But anyway, man, back to you. Thanks for asking.
Hey, no worries. I just want to make sure I wasn't the only one feeling that. And you made it pretty clear that I'm not. We're both on the same path. And I know that right now I work with other educators and they're at the same place, right?
Yeah.
It's how do we get the education happening? What tools can we use? What technology can we use? What can we do to help the students learn? And
thinking about it purposefully, and just sort of instead of cruising along by default. So yeah, man. And I'll be honest, I've had a lot of, I don't want to say personal turbulence. It's not turbulence going on. But if I'm not totally locked into the moment to the extent that I would prefer to be, I have to acknowledge it's due to the fact somewhat that a very beloved family member passed away. My grandmother Anne, who lived to be well into her 80s, has passed away, and it was totally time for her, and it was it happened in a very organic. It was the best kind of way for it to happen, as per the situation at hand, and with my family around her. So, but still, it's kind of bandwidth that I would normally have to engage in witty repartee isn't maybe as quite as there today, just because this kind of thing's been going on right in the background. So,
and it's not the background. I was sorry to hear that when that popped up.
It's
on social media.
And I appreciate that, and it is the most like normal, natural thing in the world. And I want to say, people, you don't need to be sorry. It was beautiful and it was time, but I also understand that people are sorry because it's just that's what you say, and I get it. She had an amazing life. She leaves a huge, brilliant legacy, full of connections of people that I don't even know about. She was one of the stars in their sky, and yeah. So anyway, man, thanks for allowing me to diverge onto that a bit here. So where are we going next with this? I mean, Weller.
But
okay,
that's part of our current life. That's part of
true.
The current ed tech, right? Because this happens, and how do we roll with it? And I have no idea how to flow that into the next article other than just an abrupt jump. So I'm just going to abruptly jump.
Okay, well, just one more thing then, if I may, is that shout out to Weller, sure. shout out to that 25 years of ed tech reading, that book. It's a pretty high level overview, and it's pretty breezy. It's pretty easy to read as far as these things go. I've said this before. I think that Weller has a way of writing conversationally on his blogs and some of his things that come out in book formats and other formats. So it's I don't often make the recommendation on this show that something is enjoyable to read, but here we are. I am. So anyway, thanks for that, Doug.
Oh, you're welcome. And that's his writing is something that I just love. Like I went through so many articles in the last 2 weeks to try to find what we were going to talk about, and so many of them were like dense and difficult on purpose. Like,
right.
So I'm reading it and it's like there's an easy way to state that, right? And there's an easier way to state this. And so reading Weller's was just, he got to the point. The points were good. They made sense. He could have made it a lot harder to read, but he didn't. He chose to make it welcoming and open, and it was just a joy. To be honest, it's like, I can read this because being a history nerd, like my first degree was history, and I've read history textbooks from 100 years ago. I've read them from 50 years ago, and now I'm reading the current ones, and the current ones are so much easier to read because the style has changed to a way that makes more sense for the current everyday readers. Like, stuff doesn't have to be hard just to be hard, right? If you can't present a concept and have people understand it, then you don't understand it well enough, or you're not a very good writer, right? That's where I live with those sorts of ideas. Anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox and go to the 2023 Kersens and Van Dyke article.
Awesome.
They talk about the platformization of primary education in the Netherlands. And I like reading stuff from the Netherlands because It is. It really is. And platformization is like the penetration of infrastructures, economic processes, and government frameworks of platforms in different sectors or spheres of your life. And we have so many of those in ed tech. And that's what some of the big companies have built, right? It's like, oh, what infrastructure do you have? Oh, we're a Google school, or we're a Microsoft school, or I'm in the Apple infrastructure, right? Like, and all those things mean different interactions and different things are going to happen. So part of what we're dealing with now in ed tech is the infrastructure, the platformization. It's like, where are we going? Like, even with learning management systems. Oh, are you a D2L school? Are you a Canvas school? Are you a Blackboard school, a Moodle school? All of those things impact education. And we're dealing with that in a way that just drives me bonkers, because we can't pick and choose anymore. It can't be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's like when we redid our audio systems here. You were so smart. You went and you bought a set and plugged it in and everything worked. And I went and bought a mic, and then I bought a mic arm, and then and all the pieces were separate, and it took me 2 weeks to figure out how to put it together to make it work. So the picking and choosing is just tougher than it needs to be, and the platformization makes a lot of sense that way. And it's just, that's kind of where we are. But that's also part of the commercialization of ed tech, which I'm not a big fan of. It's the monetization gets away from the let's help the students, in my humble opinion. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on all that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot to respond to there, Doug, but I appreciate a lot of what you were saying. I guess I'll just say shout out to BC Campus, shout out to eCampus Ontario for having significant repositories available to not just educators, but students directly through eText, things like H5P repositories, which I'm just completely enamored with, how-to guides, templates for course development, e-learning, webinars. I mean, to me, this is very good use of significant amounts of post-secondary government, expenditure in those areas to make it more accessible. It's just really, shows a lot of foresight, a lot of good long-term planning, but more importantly, good execution by people who are committed to it. Like being able to have an educational mindset, even though they might be far further behind the scenes than you typically imagine an educator being, right? So that's kind of, I guess, just the main thing there that kind of jumps out at me. I guess the other thing that sort of you refer to in terms of when I think platformization, just in terms of how it's presented there, which is really quite cool. You as you were describing it, whether it's a D2L school or Moodle school or whatever, I've really been within my role trying to kind of pursue having a few different solutions at hand and not just one. So having multiple platforms in small, licensing agreements, so as to be able to sort of reach for the appropriate kit, particularly, I guess, with SCORM-based courses, as opposed to something that maybe is more within an LMS, more widely formatted with more moving parts to it, rather than not to get too far into the weeds from a technical standpoint here, but I guess it's anything to do with ed tech tends to be inherently fraught because it involves budgetary expenditure, and just anything that goes along with more than one stakeholder having a line budget item, it becomes a bit of a shit show. At least in post-secondary, seems to be more effectively handled because it's not public funds as such. I'm finding here in the public, in the private sector that I'm working in now. So Anyway, a bit of a ramble there, bud, but thanks for asking.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about SCORM then. Because in my experience, people either love SCORM objects or they hate SCORM objects, and there doesn't seem to be an in-between.
Well, I think
I don't even know what the definition of SCORM is.
It's basically a wrapper for files so that through the wrapper, the SCORM package, as it were, that is what gives the content within it interoperability between the creator of those objects and then how it deploys and how people can then take SCORM from the original setting of where it was created and then place that in their own learning management system. It's kind of like the notion of LTIs, kind of like plugins a bit. It's an accepted standard that's widely used across the e-learning industry, and it's very efficient. It's very efficient because what you can put into that package determines largely then a lot, obviously, about how people experience e-learning when the package gets reconstituted. I've kind of likened it a bit to a really hyped up PowerPoint in terms of what that looks like, just with the moving slides experience, maybe like a automated robo voice kind of reading it out to you. Not a lot of, you may have some limited drag and drop kind of opportunities or kind of quizzes within it, but it's very scripted, right? Everything flows in a certain way and you just complete it from start to finish, not unlike watching a video almost, except it is, I think, more typically like a PowerPoint. I've seen some really cool objects built into it. People who actually take the development once, it's reconstituted within their local system and done some really, really time and labor intensive interactions on top of that. But I would also say that compared to, say, the very efficient user interface of, say, H5P interactions, I really think, for me, I just like my preferred development mode. And I guess I do have my time at Thompson Rivers to credit for that, just because that was where I first, kind of experienced it, is using just very easy to use, very user-friendly H5P interactions. I don't feel the need to have to go get trained up on Adobe Cloud or whatever. Just all these more proprietary systems. And I guess to wind down this really long tangent, Doug, sorry, man, I'll just wind it down to say that there's sort of this ethos. I've almost been thinking of SCORM as being more proprietary, and then just your sort of OER as being sort of a different, philosophically kind of oriented approach. And I think that may speak to the point of what we're after here. So thanks for letting me ramble there, bud.
No problem. And I put you on the spot with it, but I think SCORM stands for Shareable Content Object Reference Model. I think that's what it stands for. And when I think of a SCORM object, like if you put it in a learning management system, I always think of when you archive a folder, like when you zip a folder and then the whole folder comes across to the next person and they open it up and it looks just the way you want it. I always saw that zipping and archiving as the same concept, not the same degree of difficulty, but the same concept of what SCORM does. You take all your stuff, you put it together a certain way and make sure it'll connect to the learning management system this way and this way and that way. And then you make it one package and then you just install it and it works.
Right.
Supposedly that's, and I know some people that like to fiddle with stuff once they get their content. And it's you're not doing that with a SCORM object. The SCORM object is there. It's going to take you a heck of a lot more work.
So ultimately, and yeah, this is actually, I think, conducive to our point here. I think there's really an important role that the high production values has to play. Like if you are doing stuff with online learning and you have the ability to make it more visually appealing, having effective user experience, managing the experience so that you don't have people scrolling endlessly or doing clicks to like empty pages or whatever, just basic good instructional design, user experience, I think that can go a long way. And I think if you get sort of spending more time like just on the technical aspects of the development, I think privileges a skill set that's not really necessary to the practicing conscientious educator. So this is where my philosophical preference tends to be with H5P interactions, with whatever can have a reasonably, cool level of production value, but with the most limited possible necessary learning curve for the ability to do that. The tech to do that should have the least possible learning curve, in my opinion. So SCORM tends to privilege the tech aspect of it more, and OER definitely, when it's being done properly, I think tends to privilege the ed part of the equation there, if I can.
Yes, and that leads nicely into my next article, the 2022 Halim, Javed, Quadri, and Suman article, but understanding the role of digital technologies in education. And you just described it really nicely for the balance of the technical abilities people have. And they talked about sustainable development, and they talked about how all this implementation has impacted schools and institutions. Go ahead.
Well, just not to put too much fine a point on the effect that COVID had, but when I think of my own personal hangups and conundrums professionally at the time, when I really visualize COVID learning, I think of my kids' educators, the K to 12 teachers, adapting to it. And I think those lessons are not lost in the present environment. Hopefully there's some traces of how to be flexible and how to kind of move through contemporarily, having learned from that somehow, right? Because that's still relatively recent lessons. Anyway, I don't know that actually speaks to the reading, pal, but that was what was going through my mind. So.
No, it was, because look at the development that had to happen suddenly, like in March 2020. Suddenly, all of these things changed right now.
All of those platforms were just kind of sitting there as capabilities, where a few self-chosen, largely people who thought they were cool, kind of knew about them, as opposed to, okay, what do we use? So suddenly all this stuff went from being very abstract and in the background, if you will, to being of sudden immediate urgency. And the extent to which some of those experiments proved fruitful, I saw evidence of that with what my kids' teachers were able to achieve. Of course, some of it fell flat, but I think by and large, the mass amount of innovation that had to happen in a relatively short period of time probably was a helpful exercise, not just in the outputs, but in the habits of thinking, which people had to exercise on the spot. So anyway, that's just, again, I think, timely reminders of how everything has changed in terms of how we think about platforming and deploying technology within still within the past 5 years, for sure. It's quite different now, right? I think so.
Oh, Absolutely. And the big question is the sustainability.
Yes.
Every teacher I talk to, it's like every September, because that's when school starts here. It's like, here's the new initiatives coming to the school. And the old timers kind of sit back and it's like, yeah, okay. This happens every year. There's a new couple every year. I'll sit back and see if this one's actually going to like kick in and actually be a thing, or if it's just something we're going to waste our time on for a month or two and then go back to the old ways.
Yeah, I appreciate that you're characterizing a certain set of people out there who may not race to embrace whatever is being brought out by the administration of their organization on a mandated innovation is just the worst. It's like that's it. That's what causes the eye rolls. That's what causes people to disengage. When things can kind of emerge from the grassroots and take hold as an initiative, that's I think preferable. But yeah, again, just yeah, change, right? It's always happening. You can't escape it, basically.
Well, that's that line I loved from a person I work with at TRU, Thompson Rivers.
Okay.
It was change is inevitable, suffering is optional. And that's where we're at now, where it's in our lives right now. Change is happening in education, and we can suffer or not. Change doesn't mean to be easy, but if you can't change your mindset, if you don't have that open mindset and be open to change, then you're going to suffer. And that's just disastrous for everybody.
Flexibility.
Now,
so important.
Yes. And flexibility is going to be at the root of this next article, the Chowdhury and Chasm 2020, Artificial Intelligence in Education. Because AI is absolutely forcing educators to change practice and to be flexible. And these two went in and they took a look at 4 different ways that AI is affecting education and educators and students. One is it can reduce teachers' workloads, and people like that part. It's contextualizing learning for students, because it's way easier to come up with these scenarios and stuff using AI to help you create those prompts rather than you doing everything from scratch. There are also intelligent tutoring systems, right? It's like, oh, here, I tried it and then I compared it to the AI, which one is right, or where did AI get it wrong? And so there's all that stuff, which is great. And then it's revolutionizing assessments, because were we trying to assess student learning, or were we assessing other stuff? Were we assessing their ability to write clearly? Were we assessing their ability to regurgitate information? So that's where we're at right now. Like, this is a real honest to goodness thing. I know of a couple of people that are making their names as the AI and education experts, and they're starting to do the tour. And they're going around to all the institutions saying, here's what you got to do. So I'm wondering, because you're not in post-secondary, are you getting the opportunity to see people using the AI prompts to reduce workloads or to help conceptualize learning or anything like that they've mentioned?
I guess I would say that LinkedIn is cool for catching wind of that kind of stuff. So when I am kind of just culling my emails that I send myself for when I've been preparing my notes lately, that's where I find a lot of the AI related stuff, just because some of the people I follow are like higher ranking academics and or government workers who have policy to say, things, commentary on policy and announcements of things. I just think following that line of discourse on it is more helpful than just kind of like, here's the latest hype article. So this is, I guess, why, so in terms of my immediate work situation, to answer your question, not so much. But I'm also aware that within the security environment, for sure, for just things like having cameras that profile in advance, there are some very like potentially sticky areas where AI, because it is a tool, can be misapplied or improperly or without due thought. And I don't think the area that I work in is particularly unique in that regard, because as a society across all sectors, it's the AI pivot, TM, which we came up with on the show. I'm going to have to put that in the
Yes, we
metadata.
did.
The AI pivot, TM. Anyway, yeah. So I just think, like, to speak to post-secondary and to speak to as somebody who's more focused on workplace learning, if one of the acknowledged benefits, one of the acknowledged purposes of higher ed, post-secondary higher ed. I know you don't like that term, Doug, higher ed.
True enough.
But is to get people ready to participate meaningfully in the workforce. Then if you're not introducing AI even as a subject matter in your content, as well as hopefully finding ways to use it, because this is just going to be something where in 3 or 4 years, when these students who are presently in the programs leave, I mean, the cat's out of the bag, the horse is out of the barn. It's there's just going to be more of this. It's just going to be, AI is just going to become the default setting. It's just, you won't even have to mention it anymore, just because it's like saying, well, I used a graphics program, or I used a some sort of search engine. It's just going to be so ubiquitous and so embedded in everything we do that you won't have to even mention it anymore. So I think we're doing our young people, or our people who are in programs, a disservice at this point if we don't have that dialogue, and if we don't try and use those capabilities ourselves effectively. If not, not just like, let's have teaching activities going on about it, but even just like trying to use it in your own practice in other ways. So there, speaking of soapboxes.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, and some of the interesting stuff that I've been reading outside of this, because I needed to narrow it down to one article, basically, because there was a bunch, because that is the latest and greatest. That's the one that's on fire right now, and almost every article I read said you have to embrace it. You can't say no, you can't ban it, which makes me feel better, because a few episodes ago, I said the exact same thing. You can't ban this stuff. It's here. It's now. You got to deal with it. And it makes me feel better to know that I'm on the same page as all these other people. I think we're headed in the right direction. How do we use this tool to help? I see that as our goal.
I completely agree, pal. We're doing really optimistically here. And then you have Cares and Butchner. And this is about just what we were speaking to before, education after the pandemic. So what did you see in that article that kind of resonated with you, Bud?
Have you... Okay, here's... When I looked at this, I saw an internet meme. And it floats across my Instagram feed once a week or so. And it's always the same thing. There are two types of people in the world. One type says, I went through it, so you have to. And the other type says, I went through it, so you don't have to. And that's what this struck me as. Like, we had the pandemic, and we're still dealing with COVID, but we're trying to shift. And some people want to shift back to the way it was before, right? I want to go back to where we were in 2019. I I've learned, I survived it, and forget it. I'm going back to 2019. And other people are saying, no, what did we learn? How can we include that in our practice? How can we have more online and more blended courses and go that way? Because it's not online is bad, because the pandemic pivot was not online. That was a disastrous, oh my goodness, we got to go now. We got a week. Make it happen. Change your whole professional practice in a week or 2 weeks, or maybe some places said it's a month, but then all these kids are sitting at home we're supposed to be in school. So this was really the dichotomy between jump back or learn from it and roll. What do you got for the well? I want to hear what you were thinking.
Only to the extent that I've been hearing about the stresses and everything that was very post-secondary, higher ed, whatever, stressors from this. It was not unlike that in other areas. That's what I'm hearing. It was disruptive. People were not adequately prepared for it. And in the sector that I'm in, a lot of training that would normally happen just didn't happen. It's not even that they had that it got restructured. It's just that it didn't end up happening, whereas it was before. And now it's sort of, how do you remediate that gap, basically, that accrued over the pandemic and since. You're kind of, how do you go into being now in a situation of being proactive instead of still feeling like you're scrambling to catch up with something from a year or two ago, right? That was the well. And thank you for allowing me to expound upon the well.
I'm going to ask you to dive into that well a little bit more, because if somebody was doing training and didn't get to do it for 3 years, is the training actually needed?
In
if
some
somehow
cases,
we survived for 3 years without those people. Go ahead.
Well, it's true. I'm thinking, though, first of all, I appreciate where you're going. If training doesn't get delivered for a certain period of time and the wheels don't fall off, then what need was there of it, perhaps, in the first place? And that's not a bad way of thinking of it, I think. Is that a good characterization of where you were going with that, Doug?
Yes.
Awesome. I would just say that in perhaps I've noted, it's not that it's maybe more prevalent outside academia as it is, maybe I'm just noticing it more because of my position now. But I guess, issue that becomes problematic from that standpoint is when you need things like external accreditation in order to be able to practice. You need, like, your first aid cert renewed every 2 years. You need, for instance, nonviolent training or use of force, or things that actually have certification externally required in order to even be able to operate. When you have like a multitude of things by other agencies or other organizations that you have to align with in order to operate and deliver your full range of products or services or whatnot, to that extent, it can be tough, because if you have a whole group of people who are just, right at the line where they suddenly need a bunch of expensive or complex training to be developed or delivered, or perhaps in some cases people, their certifications in certain areas lapse, and they're not able to practice in certain areas that they would have been able to do. So, and that just leads to gross, not necessarily, in some instances, in some job sites, safety would suffer from that, but certainly just, it's just, again, speaking to being it, whether you're able to be proactive or reactive within your situation. So,
and part of that conversation for me is the deep dive into why are we doing it that way, because I knew people that their certifications, like their 2-year certs for stuff, ran out in like June 2020. And everybody was like, okay, we're dealing with it. You're fine. Like, well, we'll catch you up at some point. But did they need to be caught up? Like, they still operated and they still did it all okay. And I realized it was a worldwide emergency. I get that. But I take another view of it when I look at like undergrad education degrees. Some people can get their degree in 1 year with a previous degree. Some can get it in 2 years with a previous degree. Some people get it in 4 years without a previous degree. Their only degree is the BEd, and yet somehow they can all teach. Like, and are these things equivalent, or are they just different approaches to get there? We don't have one common approach. Like, if we could put a BEd program into a SCORM object, it's a clunk, this is it. This is what you have to do. And we don't. So I was just more digging down that rabbit hole just because it came to me, and I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
So you're asking me my thoughts on that particular rabbit hole. Okay. I'm going to ask you to rephrase more succinctly, if you may. So I'm going to just, you're passing me the basketball, and I'm just going to say, no, man, back to you. You're going up there. You're going up there. Just post up. Do that layup shot, man, with that one.
Okay, fair enough. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot, and I realize I rambled a bit. But one thing I've always tried to look at is the big picture.
Yep.
Yeah, I know. We're cool with it. That's what we do. But what I'm wondering is the big picture of why are we doing some of these things? Like, my undergrad history degree was 3 years. You can't do that now.
I got you.
Right? I know my parents, they did their undergrad degree and it was 2 years. But now 2 years in some places is a certificate, 2 years in other places is an associate degree. That seems to have gotten made up south of the border. So we're building on what post-secondary is, and we're just making it up as we go along. So what do people actually need to know? And this was more about what do people actually need to know.
I got you.
That's all. That's all where I was coming from.
Oh yeah, no, I just think a lot of it's politically laden. I just think whoever has been voted in as a political party, nothing gets is more politicized. Few things, besides maybe government mandates on vaccines, are as fraught as how the federal government invests in certain areas of education, how provincial governments act in certain areas of education, and then at the institutional level, it just seems like what can you do to drive, your highest amount of FTEs, your full-time enrollments, such that you can get the full government grant associated with each of those FTEs, and that's only speaking to the public institutions. I have no idea how that works. And for the private institutions, even though we know you're out there, it's just so it's really just so politically fraught. And when your objective is financial viability or budgetary viability, that's a different thing than trying to have optimal educational processes or outcomes. So
thank you, because that brings it back to the article a little bit. And my hope is that the lessons that were learned during COVID and during the pandemic have rolled into educational practice now. And we're going to use some of the advantages that people learned and some of the ways to help students more and continue to do that. That's my hope. And I need to be hopeful, because otherwise I'll be a cynic. And I don't want to be a cynic. I want to have some sort of positivity for the future.
The cynics were a very legit philosophical movement back in the day, back like in the
Oh, yeah.
ancient Greece times. In a lot of ways, considered precursors to both the Epicureans and as well the Stoics, who I've got quite significant interest in, just because, I mean, like what a miserable way to live your life on the one hand, just doubting and challenging everything, but then on the other hand, what you get through such complete misery is you can be relatively sure it's got value once it gets through all those checks and evaluations, right? So yeah, just the cynics don't want to give them too hard of a rep, that's all.
No, not at all. It's just we've lost control of that definition, though.
Yes.
And society gives them a harder time than where they actually were before.
I hear you, man.
So
that was the last.
So those are all the articles that I dug up.
You got some very compelling visuals on this one, my dude. Very compelling visuals. Are there any of them that are kind of standing out at you that you want to speak to them here, or?
The only one even though I just talked about positivity, my favorite one of all these pictures. So for the people that go to the website, my favorite one is somebody laid out a tarp at a school picnic and put a bunch of printers and stuff there with some baseball bats, and it was like, go to it. Because if I'm going to smash any technology, it's a printer, because they are the ultimate stress devices.
EdTech rage rooms. You know how they have that in some cities where you can go in and smash a certain number of sets of dishware or something. You just load up all your printers or printer scanner combos, or all your non-functional or ceaselessly breaking down hardware, and just woo. Could be fun. Good times could be had at such a picnic, I would wager.
Oh yeah, and we're still at. Yeah. I love it. We're still at the point where, why does this keep happening? I'm to the point now where I don't have a printer. I haven't had a printer in my house in years. I would rather go to like Staples or go to work and print something off and pay for it there than have to deal with the stupid, okay, I want to print something in black and white, but I need to go buy the yellow cartridge before I can print. It's like, well, I don't want yellow. Well, it doesn't matter. You the way they've got it set up just drives me bonkers.
Yeah, I spent like a couple $100 on getting like one of the good ones, like a Canon, the most current Canon scanner printer combo, and I started to unpack it from the box, and I immediately became so underwhelmed. I put it in the closet, sent the box to the recycling curb. So I'm keeping this damn thing. It's sitting there. Haven't even used it once. I got the things of paper, and every time I think I could use this for something, I go, okay, how can I manipulate the document digitally instead of having to print something, right? So I hear you, man. I think.
Yeah, we're on the same page.
All
the other images that are on the website, please go take a look. They just struck me as things that happen right now. So it's one of those things to deal with. Yes, there's one with like a history of storage, like computer storage devices, that I could have added last time, but it just made me feel like this is more of a current thing. And I remember each of those being, oh wow, isn't that cool? That's how old I am. I have a memory of each of the 5 different devices in the cartoon. Anyway, that's because I'm old and crusty and nerdy, and I'm fine with that. So I have 3 last things, which is Word, of the podcast, phrase of the podcast, question of the podcast. And word of the podcast is AI pivot, because we brought it up again. And how do we get that out there as a hashtag someplace? We'll just.
I thought word of the podcast was present. It's AI pivot.
I changed it while we were. As soon as you said AI pivot, I was like, oh man, that's a better word. So I went and changed it. So sorry about that.
TM. I got to put the TM beside it. Yeah.
Question of the podcast is, what's the current state of ed tech and professional practice? And everybody has their own current state where they're at. Like, some people are working at places with modern technology. Some people are using computers that are Windows 7 devices, right? So where are you at? What are you doing? And the phrase of the podcast is have a few different solutions, not just one. And I think that typifies what we said. It's when you go in to teach a class, or you go in to prepare an educational opportunity for a student, you need a few different solutions, not just one. And you put that together really nicely with that turn of phrase. So that had to be my phrase of the podcast.
Well, that's sick, my friend. And I mean that in the best possible way. So that's rad. That's rad. I'm enjoying this. I feel like you've been really kind. You've been throwing it to me like, we don't have to do this every week, but I've been kind of I appreciate the tempo of the enhanced schedule that we've been going towards. We did lose about 6 weeks of time during the summer months, closer to 2 by the time you take all the various factors. So if you consider that this is 40 episodes and we're on month 13 with this right now, I think it's the other thing too is just for me not having my kids around. Normally I would turn my head and I wouldn't necessarily be running around playing a sport outside with them or something, but it would just be, hey, let's watch this thing together, or let's do some family stuff. So for me, I just got more time now for this stuff, which it's nowhere near as fun ultimately as hanging out with my kids, if I'm being honest, but it's a good secondary thing right now. And I figure got the time, so may as well use it. So there we go. Huge qualifier on it, but I am saying I can't think of anything better to do at the moment than this. So.
And that's a nice way to wrap up Ghosts of EdTech Present, because that's where we're at. This is our present.
It is. Well, thanks, Doug, for the thanks to Doug and Aaron for the awesome topic on this one. Thanks to all you out there who are, listen, my last shout out here is just in terms of mental health. Don't frazzle yourself now going into the holiday period. I feel like I got to throw that out there. Just take care of yourself. I think, Doug, you use the analogy with mental health. It's like when you're on the airplane and the thing comes down, you got to put it on yourself before you can be helpful to others. So you're not going to do anybody any good if you're just getting all stressed out about the time of year and your obligations under that and whatnot. Just mental health and well-being first, people. Okay, so that's my public service announcement, weirdly thrown on at the end of this episode, I guess. Thanks for listening, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.